Hey, tonight we're diving into the secret, brutal, yet oddly pampered lives of medieval dogs. From luxurious, velvet-cushioned greyhounds feasting like princes, and strained turnspit pups slogging inside fiery kitchen wheels, to a heroic hound crowned a saint. If that sounds wild, tap like and hit subscribe. And let me know in the comments your city, country, what time it is, and what's keeping you awake right now. Imagine, for a moment, that you are not where you are now. The soft glow of your screen is gone. The hum of modern life has vanished. Instead, you find yourself walking on a muddy, rutted track leading into a medieval town. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, damp earth, and something else. The scent of life, unfiltered and raw. You see timber-framed houses leaning against each other as if for support. You hear the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of merchants in the marketplace, and the lowing of cattle being driven through the narrow streets. And everywhere you look, you see them. There, a scruffy, rib-thin dog with matted fur darts into an alleyway, a stolen crust of bread in its mouth. You see another, a heavy-set, powerful-looking beast, lying chained by the door of a weaver's shop, its eyes tracking every person who passes. And then, a noblewoman rides by on a fine horse, and nestled in the crook of her arm is a tiny, fluffy creature, no bigger than a loaf of bread, adorned with a collar of soft leather and tiny tinkling bells. Dogs were as much a part of the medieval landscape as the castles and cathedrals that defined it. They were a constant presence, a shadow at the heels of humanity, from the king on his throne to the peasant in his hovel. But what was it truly like to be one of these creatures? To live a life in a time so governed by status, survival, and superstition. We like to think of our relationship with dogs as something timeless, a simple bond of love and loyalty. But the medieval world was not simple. It was a place of stark contradictions, of profound faith and casual brutality, of exquisite beauty and squalid filth. And the life of a dog reflected every one of these paradoxes. Tonight, as the fire crackles and the world outside grows quiet, we are going to explore the secret lives of these medieval animals. We will journey into the lavish kennels of the aristocracy and the cold, damp corners of peasant huts. We will run with the hounds on a royal hunt and toil alongside the humble turnspit dog in a smoky kitchen. We will uncover a world where a dog could be a cherished symbol of fidelity, worthy of being carved in stone on its master's tomb, and also a creature so despised it was associated with sin and the devil himself. This is the story of man's best friend in an age of saints and sinners, of knights and serfs. It is the story of how they were loved, how they were used, and how they survived. So, settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let the gentle sound of the fire take you back. To understand the life of a medieval dog, you must first understand the rigid hierarchy of the human world it inhabited. A dog's fate, its comfort, its very survival, was almost entirely dependent on the status of its owner. There was no single experience of being a dog. There were two, separated by a chasm as wide as the one between a lord and his lowest servant. Let's first walk into the world of the common dog, the peasant's cur. We must begin here, in the mud and the mire, because this was the reality for the vast majority of canines. Forget the pampered lapdogs of ladies and the prized hounds of knights for a moment. The typical medieval dog was a creature of necessity, a living tool whose existence was justified only by its utility. Picture the home of a peasant family. It is a small, one-room hut, built of wattle and daub, with a dirt floor that turns to mud in the rain. The roof is thatched, and a hole in the center allows some of the smoke from the central fire to escape. But the air is always thick with it, stinging your eyes and coating every surface with a thin layer of soot. There is no glass in the small window openings, only wooden shutters that are closed tight at night, plunging the room into near total darkness. The family sleeps together on straw pallets on the floor, sharing the space, the warmth, and the smells with their few precious livestock, perhaps a pig or a few chickens, huddled at the far end of the room for safety. And here, curled by the dying embers of the fire, is the dog. It is not a specific breed. It is a mongrel, a cur, a product of chance encounters in the village. Its coat is rough and matted. Its ears are torn from fights, and its ribs show faintly beneath its skin. It is not a pet in our modern sense. It is a worker. In a household where every calorie is counted, where every member must contribute to the family's survival, this dog must earn its keep every single day. Its primary and perhaps most vital role is that of a guardian. In a world with no police force, where law was often distant and justice uncertain, the safety of your home and family was your own responsibility. Imagine the dead of night. The family is asleep. A strange sound comes from outside. The snap of a twig, the scrape of a boot on stone. Before any human ear has registered the threat, the dog is awake. A low growl rumbles in its chest, a vibration felt more than heard. Its ears are pricked, its body tense. If the sound comes closer, the growl erupts into a volley of sharp, furious barks that shatter the night silence. The family is instantly awake, alert to the danger. The would-be thief or vagrant, hearing the ferocious alarm, knows this is not an easy target and moves on. In this simple act, the dog has paid for its meager rations for a week. It is a living, breathing security system in a world fraught with peril. If the family lives in the countryside, the dog's work continues at dawn. For the shepherd, his dog is not just a helper, it is an extension of his own mind and body. Out on the windswept hills, in driving rain or baking sun, the dog works tirelessly. It understands a complex language of whistles, hand signals, and quiet commands. It circles the flock, keeping the sheep from straying, nipping at the heels of the stubborn, and guiding them with an intelligence that seems almost human. It is the shepherd's only companion for long, lonely days, a partner in the constant battle against the elements and predators. A good sheepdog, often large and white to be easily distinguished from a wolf in the twilight, is worth more than several men. It is a guardian of the flock, wearing a spiked leather collar to protect its throat, ever watchful for the shadow of a wolf slinking at the edge of the woods. Back in the village, the dog's work is less dramatic, but no less crucial. It is a ratter, a relentless hunter of vermin. The family's grain store, the product of a year's hard labor, is their lifeline through the long, lean winter. The constant threat to this store is not from thieves, but from the silent, gnawing destruction of rats and mice. A cat might catch a few, but a good terrier-type dog is a whirlwind of fury, a dedicated exterminator that protects the family's future from being eaten away in the dark. Every rat it kills is a few more mouthfuls of bread for the children. In the growing towns, dogs performed an even wider variety of jobs. The butcher's dog, a tough, fearless ancestor of the bull terrier, was a common sight. Its job was to help drive frightened, aggressive cattle from the countryside through the chaotic, narrow streets to the slaughterhouses. It was a dangerous, brutal job, requiring immense courage and strength. These dogs were often paid in offal, the unwanted parts of the butchered animals, and it was not uncommon to see them gnawing on an ox head in the middle of a city street, a gruesome sight that often drew the ire of townsfolk. Other dogs, smaller and leaner, pulled small carts for merchants, delivering goods on market day, their paws scrabbling on the cobblestones. And some, the most unfortunate, were forced into the brutal blood sports of bull and bear baiting, their tenacity and courage exploited for the grim entertainment of a crowd. But perhaps the most specialized and grueling job a common dog could have was that of the turnspit. Picture a vast, hot, and chaotic kitchen in a great castle or a large inn. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat. A great fire roars in the hearth, and over it, a heavy joint of beef or a row of chickens turns slowly on a spit. But there is no machine turning it, no weary kitchen boy. Instead, mounted high on the wall, away from the worst of the flames, but still in the oppressive heat, is a large wooden wheel, much like a modern hamster wheel. And inside this wheel, a small, sturdy dog with short legs and a long body trots endlessly. Its paws, calloused and tough, turn the wheel. The wheel turns a chain, and the chain turns the spit, ensuring the meat cooks evenly. For hours this dog must run, its world reduced to the endless turning of the wheel. The heat from the fire below is relentless. The shouts of the kitchen staff are a constant barrage of noise. It is monotonous, exhausting, and utterly thankless work. So well known was this canine profession that it became a recognized office in the hierarchy of the canine world. Legends even grew around these dogs, claiming that they worked in pairs and knew instinctively when their shift was over. It was said that when one turnspit dog had finished its grueling hours, it would seek out its partner and nip at it until the other took its place in the wheel. The physical existence of these working dogs was as harsh as their labor. Their diet was a constant, desperate scramble for calories. They subsisted on whatever was left over after the humans had eaten, and often there was very little. They gnawed on bones until their teeth were worn, licked pots clean, and scavenged for anything edible in the rubbish heap. In a peasant household, a dog was in direct competition for food with the family itself, and it had to justify every mouthful through its work. These were not dogs of fine breeding. They were the mongrel and rascal sort, as one 16th century writer put it. Their lineage was a tangled knot of chance encounters. No one cared about their pedigree, only their hardiness. A dog that was a picky eater, or was susceptible to sickness, or lacked the instinct to guard or hunt, would not last long. It was a world of survival of the fittest, where only the toughest, most adaptable dogs survived to pass on their genes. Their health was precarious, their lives brutally short. There were no veterinarians for the common dog. An injury from a fight or a kick from a cow would be left to fester, or perhaps treated with a folk remedy of herbs and superstition. Diseases like distemper and rabies were common and fatal. The average peasant dog that survived puppyhood was old by the age of 5 or 6, its body worn out by hard labor, poor nutrition, and the constant struggle for survival. And yet, despite this harsh reality, a bond existed. It was not the sentimental affection we lavish on our pets today. It was a deeper, more pragmatic connection, forged in the crucible of shared hardship. This dog was a member of the household in the most practical sense. It shared the family's shelter, their meager warmth, and their daily struggle. The farmer knew his dog's every mood, and the dog knew its master's every command. It was a relationship built on mutual dependence, an unspoken understanding that in this hard world they needed each other to get by. The dog. Now, let us leave this world of toil and travel to the estate of a great lord. Here, the life of a dog is utterly transformed. For the aristocracy, dogs were not just tools. They were instruments of their greatest passion, the hunt, and powerful symbols of their noble status. The lap of luxury, life as an aristocratic hound. A gentle, more refined harp or lute piece begins and plays softly in the background. As we cross the threshold from the commoner's world into the domain of the aristocracy, the very air seems to change. The life of a dog here is not a matter of grim survival, but a carefully curated performance of status, wealth, and power. The hounds of a nobleman were not mere animals. They were living embodiments of the aristocratic ideal of vivre noblement, the art of living nobly. Their care and maintenance were a public spectacle, and, admiringly, no expense was spared. The greyhound, in particular, was seen as a suitable gift for a prince, a living treasure passed between rulers. A common saying held that a nobleman was recognized by his hawk, his horse, and his greyhound. The dogs were not just part of the household, they were part of the lord's identity, a living, breathing, hunting extension of his own noble self. Let's visit their lodgings. A 14th century nobleman, Gaston Comte de Foix, a man obsessed with the hunt, wrote an entire book on the subject, Livre de Chasse, and in it he described the ideal kennel with loving, meticulous detail. Forget a simple wooden box in a muddy yard. This kennel was a purpose-built structure made of wood and raised at least a foot off the ground to protect the dogs from the damp cold that could seep into their bones and cause sickness. It would have a loft, a second story where the dogs could rest, a space designed to be cool and airy in the oppressive heat of summer, and warm and snug in the biting cold of winter. The floors were not bare wood or packed earth. Every single day, a servant would clear out the old bedding and lay down a thick, fresh layer of clean straw. And on chilly days, servants were explicitly instructed to build fires to keep the hounds warm and comfortable. The kennel would have a door that opened into a sunny, enclosed yard, so that, in Gaston's own words, the hounds may go without it to play when them liketh, for it is great liking for the hounds, when this level of care was the responsibility of dedicated servants, the valets de chien, or dog boys, whose entire lives revolved around the well-being of the pack. Their daily routine was rigorous. Each morning, the kennels were to be meticulously cleaned. Fresh water had to be provided twice a day, and the hounds were to be taken out for walks once or twice daily, not just for exercise, but to play in a fair meadow in the sun. This was not a chore, but a vital part of maintaining the health and spirits of these valuable animals. And their food? It was a world away from the peasant dog's scraps. The staple diet was specially prepared bran bread, but they were also given the choicest cuts of meat from the day's hunt. If a prized hound fell ill, its diet became even more lavish, a menu designed to tempt a failing appetite and nurse it back to health. The dog boy might prepare goat's milk, warm bean broth, finely chopped meat, or even rich, buttered eggs. This was not just animal husbandry, it was veterinary care that rivaled what a human might receive. This devotion stemmed from the top. The Lord himself often had a deep, personal connection with his hounds, a bond forged in the thrill and danger of the chase. Gaston de Foix expressed this profound relationship when he wrote, "I speak to my hounds as I would to a man, and they understand me and do as I wish better than any man of my household." This wasn't just about utility. It was a relationship of mutual respect and understanding between hunter and animal, a partnership that transcended the simple roles of master and servant. The Lord knew his dogs by name, understood their individual personalities, their strengths, their weaknesses. He would walk among them in their kennels, his voice a familiar comfort, his touch a sign of... However, there was a curious gendered aspect to this relationship. While a nobleman's identity was tied to his powerful outdoor hunting hounds, for him to keep a small dog inside and treat it as a pet was often seen as weak and unmanly. England's King Richard II, for example, was criticized for such behavior, which his detractors claimed was not becoming of a king. The man's world was the world of the hunt, the field, the forest. The indoor world of pampered pets was largely the domain of women. And what a domain it was. For an aristocratic lady, a small lapdog was not just a companion, it was an essential accessory fused into her very identity. These were the delicate, neat, and pretty dogs, as John Keyes would later write, kept for no other purpose than to satisfy wanton women's wills. These creatures, perhaps ancestors of the Maltese or small spaniels, lived a life of unimaginable luxury. They slept not in kennels, but in their lady's own bed, on soft pillows. They ate not bran bread, but choice morsels from the dinner table. A 16th century critic condemned these women who would bear the dogs in their bosoms to succor with sleep in bed and nourish with meat at board, to lie in their laps and lick their lips. When a noblewoman had her portrait painted, her little dog was almost always there, nestled in her lap or at her feet, a symbol of her status and her marital fidelity. Its image was carved onto her personal seal, and when she died, a small stone effigy of her faithful companion was placed at her feet on her tomb, complete with its tiny collar and bells, a final testament to her wealth and her loyalty. These dogs were living jewels, kitted out with leashes, coats, and cushions made from the finest materials, a conspicuous consumption of luxury that publicly demonstrated the owner's high rank. This fashion did not sit well with everyone. The church formally disapproved of keeping pets, seeing it as a frivolous waste of time and resources that could be given to the poor. Moralists condemned these lapdogs as instruments of folly, distractions that withdrew women's minds from more commendable and pious exercises. In Hans Memling's famous painting, Allegory, yet the practice was rampant, even within the church itself. Monks, and especially nuns, were notorious for flouting the rules and keeping pets. Archbishops complained that lay people brought their dogs to church services, where they would bark and, as the Archbishop of York irritably observed, annoyed, impede the service and hinder the devotion of the nuns. Some clerics, exempt from the rules that forbade men from keeping indoor pets, would flaunt their status by owning highly expensive monkeys. But for most, the simple, loyal companionship of a dog was a comfort that no amount of clerical disapproval could stamp out. The bond between human and pet was a powerful one, a quiet rebellion against the strictures of a pious life, a small, warm presence in a cold stone world. While class determined a dog's quality of life, its job gave it purpose. And for the aristocratic dog, that purpose was almost always the hunt. The medieval hunt was not just a sport, it was a complex social ritual, a vital training ground for warfare, and a primary source of fresh meat for the noble table. It was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater, and the dogs were the star performers. Let us immerse ourselves in the full experience of a great hunt for a hart, a mature male red deer. Imagine a crisp autumn morning. The air is sharp and cold, mist clinging to the hollows of the forest. You are in the heart of a royal forest. The nobles are mounted on fine horses, their colorful banners fluttering in the breeze, their laughter and talk echoing in the still air. But the real work begins away from the crowd, with a single dog and a single man. You are a limer, a type of scent hound, perhaps an ancestor of the modern bloodhound. You are held on a long leash, a lime, by the master huntsman. Your job is the most crucial of all, to find the prey, and to do so in complete silence. You move like a ghost through the undergrowth, your nose pressed to the damp earth, deciphering a complex story of scents that is invisible to the humans who follow. You are trained to be methodical, patient, a silent detective of the forest floor. When you find the fresh trail, you do not bark. You signal your master with a subtle shift in your body, a tension in the leash, a quiet whine. Once the hart is located, the forest erupts in sound and motion. The running hounds, or raches, are released. This is the pack, and their job is to chase the deer, their loud, melodic barking echoing through the woods, a sound the nobles called great melody. They are bred for stamina, for the relentless day-long pursuit that will wear the great animal down. Edward of Norwich, a 15th century duke, described the ideal running hound in painstaking detail. It should have great nostrils and open, great lips and well hanging down, large ears, well long and well hanging down, and a great breast and great shoulders. These were powerful, purpose-built animals, a living, breathing engine of pursuit. They hunt with a joyful clamor, a stark contrast to the silent work of the limer. As the chase unfolds, another type of dog waits in readiness. You are a greyhound, a sight hound, prized for your elegance and explosive speed. You are not kept in the kennels with the pack. You are a creature of the castle, often sleeping on beds alongside your masters. You and your brethren are held in relays of 3 along the deer's likely path. As the running hounds drive the exhausted hart past your position, you are unleashed. You do not follow the scent. Your eyes lock onto the fleeing animal, and you explode into motion. It is a breathtaking burst of pure speed, closing the distance in seconds. The good greyhound, it was said, should be of middle size, neither too big nor too little, so it could be used for all manner of beasts. Finally, as the deer is cornered and exhausted, perhaps driven into a river or against a rock face, the heavy cavalry is brought in. You are an elant, or a mastiff, a massive, powerful catch dog, bred for sheer strength and courage. Your bite, it was said, is more powerful than that of 3 greyhounds. Your job is to rush in and pin the dangerous cornered animal, your immense jaw strength holding the beast until the lord arrives on his horse to make the ceremonial kill with his spear or sword. It was a complex, coordinated effort, a ballet of instinct and training, and at every stage a different kind of dog played its vital part. But the dog's work extended far beyond the noble hunt. Some dogs were bred for war. The powerful Molosser, an ancestor of the modern Mastiff and Rottweiler, was used by the Romans as a war dog, and this tradition continued into the Middle Ages. Noblemen would bring their Mastiffs onto the field of battle, Great, fearsome beasts trained to attack men and horses, adding another layer of terror to the chaos of medieval combat. In the more settled world of towns and manors, the guard dog was king. A large, well-trained house hound was so valuable that in Scotland, the law stated that anyone who killed one had to stand guard in its place for a year and a day. The most prized guard dogs were mastiffs, the breed used to protect London Bridge. The 16th century physician, John Caius, described them as vast, huge, stubborn, ugly, and eager, capable of striking fear and terror with their bigger barking. These dogs were often muzzled during the day, their ferocity respected and feared. In the countryside, the shepherd's dog was an indispensable partner. These were often large white dogs, bred to be easily distinguished from a wolf in the dark. They wore a nail-studded leather collar called a melium to protect their throat from a wolf's bite. They were not just herders, but resolutely fierce protectors of the flock against both two-legged and four-legged predators. And in the bustling towns, dogs performed 100 different jobs. The butcher's dog, a tough, fearless ancestor of the bull terrier, was a common sight. Its job was to help drive frightened cattle from the countryside into the city slaughterhouses. It was a dangerous job, controlling large, panicked animals. These dogs were often paid in offal, the unwanted parts of the butchered animals, and it was not uncommon to see them gnawing on an ox head in the middle of a city street, to the annoyance of the townsfolk who complained of the mess. These same dogs, valued for their tenacity, were also used in the brutal blood sports of bull, and other dogs pulled small carts, delivering goods on market day. Some were trained as performers, doing tricks to earn money for their vagabundical masters. And in one of the most poignant examples of a dog's work, some were trained as guide dogs for the blind. A medieval plaque survives today showing a dog leading a blind man, a task that requires immense training and a deep bond of trust. From the grandest hunt to the humblest task, the medieval world was powered in part by the law and the dog. For all the love and pampering some dogs received, they were also subject to the harsh and often brutal legal realities of the medieval world. A dog's life could be governed by laws that were indifferent to its well-being, laws that reinforced the rigid social hierarchy of their human masters. To understand these laws, we must first understand the medieval concept of law itself. It was not a single uniform code as we might imagine today. It was a complex, overlapping patchwork of royal decrees, ancient manorial customs, new town ordinances, and the powerful, pervasive influence of ecclesiastical or church law. A dog and its owner navigated this tangled web, where justice was rarely blind, and one's status in the eyes of God and man determined everything. Nowhere was this legal web more tangled and more fiercely enforced than in the royal forests. We must not think of these forests as simple woodlands. They were vast, legally defined territories, often encompassing not just woods, but also open fields, villages, and even towns. They were the king's personal larder, a jealously guarded source of the most prized game, especially deer. The right to hunt this venison was the ultimate symbol of aristocratic power, a privilege reserved exclusively for the king and those high nobles he chose to grace with a royal license. The forest was also a training ground for war, where a nobleman could practice the essential skills of tracking, riding, and combat. To protect this vital resource, the forests were subject to their own special and famously harsh set of laws. As far back as the time of King Canute in the 11th century, a clear legal line was drawn. Commoners, The peasants, artisans, and laborers who made up the vast majority of the population were prohibited from owning the dogs best suited for the hunt. The primary target of this legislation was the greyhound. This was not just a matter of preventing poaching, though that was certainly a concern. It was a matter of social order. The greyhound, with its elegance, speed, and silent grace, was the ultimate aristocratic dog. For a peasant to own one was an act of social defiance. This was not an idle threat written in a dusty book and forgotten. It was regularly and ruthlessly enforced. Court records from the period are filled with cases of commoners being fined for this very offense. In 1209, a man named Roger Wandaird of Northamptonshire was brought before the court and fined simply for owning a greyhound, contrary to the assize. In 1390, under King Richard II, the law was made even more specific and stringent. Parliament declared that no layman with lands or tenements worth less than 40 shillings a year and no cleric with an income of less than £10 a year could legally own or keep a greyhound. The official justification was that such men were using the dogs to poach on Sundays when they should have been in church hearing divine service. But the underlying message was clear. The tools of the nobility were not for the hands of the common man. But what of other dogs? What of the powerful mastiffs that many people, even commoners, kept for guarding their homes and property? These dogs were too slow to run down a deer, but their strength made them a potential threat to the fawns and younger animals of the forest. And so, if you lived within the bounds of a royal forest, your mastiff was subject to a practice known as lawing, or more formally, expeditating. This was a legal requirement to maim the dog, to cripple it just enough to ensure it could never pose a threat to the king's deer. Imagine the scene. Every 3 years, the king's officials would make their rounds, a dreaded visit to assess the dogs of the forest-dwelling communities. You are a peasant, and your mastiff is your family's protector. Its deep bark the only thing standing between your meager possessions and the dangers of the night. But now, you must present your dog to the officials. They lay its front paw upon a block of wood. One man holds the dog still, while another takes up a chisel and a heavy mallet. Officials would dull or clip a few of a mastiff's front claws so it could never outrun the king's deer. The dog yelps in pain, a sound that cuts through the quiet dread of the assembled villagers. The procedure is brutal, but it is the law. Your dog is now lawed, its ability to run and dig crippled, its effectiveness as a guard diminished, but it is now legally permitted to exist. A harsher measure called hamling left some greyhounds permanently lame by cutting a hind leg tendon, guaranteeing they could not be used for poaching. To be caught with an unlawed mastiff in a forest area was to risk a heavy fine of 3 shillings, a crippling sum for a peasant, representing weeks or even months of hard labor. As towns and cities grew, a new set of legal challenges emerged. The urban environment was crowded, chaotic, and unsanitary. Dogs were everywhere. While many were working animals or beloved companions, the authorities often saw the large population of roaming and stray dogs as a public menace. They were a source of filth and noise. They stole from market stalls, and they fought in the streets. But more terrifyingly, in an age that understood disease through the lens of miasma, or bad air, dogs were seen as potent carriers of sickness. They rolled in filth, scavenged on refuse, and were believed to spread the corrupt vapors that caused the plague. In response, many cities created the office of the dog slayer, or Hundslager. This was a man whose job was to cull the stray dog population. It was a messy, dangerous, and undesirable job, sometimes even assigned as a form of public punishment for criminals. Imagine this figure walking the narrow, refuse-strewn streets. He carries a heavy club, perhaps with nails driven through the end. His task is to kill any dog found wandering loose, without a clear owner. The work is bloody, and often met with hostility. Bylaws had to be written to protect the dog slayers from the anger of residents who were fond of the local strays, who would try to hide them or chase the Hundslager away with stones and curses. Here again, the law was not applied equally. The strict social hierarchy affected dogs as much as people. A proclamation from Norwich in 1354 required that dogs be kept tied up or within an enclosure, but it made a specific exception for greyhounds, spaniels, and other hunting dogs, the dogs of the gentry. A similar law in London in 1386 specified that only the dogs of the gentry might walk freely. A nobleman's prized greyhound could trot at his heels through the city streets without fear, while the soul of the dog, symbolism and belief, beyond the practicalities of work and the restrictions of law, the dog occupied a complex and contradictory space in the medieval imagination. It was a powerful symbol, capable of representing both the highest virtues and the darkest sins. The medieval mind was one that saw the world allegorically. Every creature, every plant, every stone was a letter in God's great book, imbued with a moral and spiritual meaning. And in this symbolic landscape, the dog was a creature of profound duality. It was at once the paragon of loyalty and the embodiment of filth, a companion to saints and a familiar of the devil. Let us first explore the dog in its most celebrated role, as the ultimate symbol of loyalty. The medieval world was built upon a foundation of oaths. A knight swore fealty to his lord, a vassal to his king, a wife to her husband. In this intricate web of sworn loyalties, the dog's unwavering devotion to its master was seen as the purest, most perfect earthly example of this cardinal virtue. The dog's loyalty was not transactional, it was absolute. This is why the effigy of a dog was so often carved at the feet of a knight's tomb. It was more than just a portrait of a beloved pet. It was a powerful statement, declaring to all who saw it that the knight himself had been as faithful to his lord in life as this dog was to him even in death. For a noblewoman's effigy, the dog at her feet symbolized her marital fidelity, her unwavering loyalty to the husband who lay beside her. This perception was reinforced by a rich tradition of stories celebrating canine devotion, tales told and retold in halls and taverns across Christendom. People loved to hear these yarns, which affirmed their belief in the dog's noble spirit. One popular story tells of the great Duke of Berry, one of the most powerful men in 15th century France. Hearing of a dog that refused to leave its master's grave, sleeping on the cold earth day and night, the Duke was so moved that he went personally to see this paragon of faithfulness. Witnessing the grieving animal for himself, he gave a sum of money to a neighbor, charging him with the sacred duty of keeping the faithful beast in food for the... Another popular trope, found in countless variations, was that of a dog as an incorruptible witness, an agent of divine justice. Imagine the scene, as told in a 13th century bestiary. A man is murdered by his enemy and left for dead. His faithful dog, inconsolable, stands beside the body, its mournful howls drawing a crowd of onlookers from the nearby village. The murderer, seeing the crowd gather, thinks to allay suspicion by mingling with the throng, putting on a show of shock and sadness. But the dog is not fooled. Its grief turns to righteous fury. It singles out the killer from the crowd, leaping at him, barking and snarling, exposing his guilt for all to see. In these stories, the dog becomes more than just loyal. It becomes an instrument of God's will, its pure animal instinct cutting through human deceit to reveal the truth. Perhaps the most remarkable and bizarre story of canine virtue is that of Saint Guinevere, the holy greyhound. The tale, recorded in the 13th century by a Dominican inquisitor named Stephen of Bourbon, takes us to a manor near Lyon in France. A knight, leaving his infant son in his cradle, entrusts the child's safety to his most faithful greyhound, Guinevere. When the knight returns, he is met with a scene of horror. The nursery is in disarray. He returns to find the nursery overturned and the hound's muzzle stained red, convincing him, in panic, that tragedy has struck. The blanket stained and Guinevere's mouth is covered in blood. The knight's mind leaps to the most terrible conclusion. The dog has turned wild and killed his son. In a fit of grief and rage, he draws his sword and strikes the dog down. Only then, in the sudden, terrible silence, does he hear a faint cry. He rushes to the cradle and finds his son, alive and unharmed, and there, beneath the cradle, lies the mangled body of a huge viper. The truth dawns on him in a wave of sickening remorse. But for every story of a saintly dog, there was a competing image, a darker reflection. The dog as an unclean creature, a symbol of sin and impurity. This view was heavily influenced by the Bible, where dogs are rarely depicted in a positive light. They are often portrayed as filthy scavengers, licking sores and eating carrion. The proverb from the book of Proverbs was well known to every churchgoer. As a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. The visceral disgust of this image was used to describe the spiritual sickness of a sinner who returns to their wicked ways. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus himself warns his disciples, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs," establishing the dog as an outsider, unworthy of sacred things. The word dog could be used as a grave insult, as when Goliath scoffs at the young David, "Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves?" And in the book of Deuteronomy, the word dog is even used as a term for a male prostitute, linking the animal directly to sexual sin. This negative association bled from theology into folklore and art, linking the dog to the demonic. In medieval manuscripts, the devil was sometimes depicted in the form of a black dog. In terrifying images of the Last Judgment, some medieval paintings show fierce black dogs herding the condemned toward the fiery mouth of hell. In one particularly chilling image, from the 12th century Hortus Deliciarum, Satan sits upon a throne made of fire-spewing hounds, a vision of chaos and terror. The folklore of the black dog, a spectral beast that roamed lonely roads at night, was widespread. To see it was an omen of death. This was not just an abstract idea, it was a palpable fear that populated the medieval night. This powerful negative symbolism could also be weaponized. It became a tool of persecution, a way to slander and dehumanize one's enemies. The most famous example of this is the treatment of the Waldensians, a religious movement that began in the 12th century. The Waldensians advocated for a life of apostolic poverty and believed that the Bible should be translated into the common language of the people, ideas that put them in direct conflict with the authority of the Catholic Church. To discredit this accusation was a masterstroke of propaganda. By linking the Waldensians to the dog, their opponents tapped into the deep well of negative biblical and demonic associations. It transformed a theological disagreement into a story of grotesque evil. It suggested that these heretics were not just misguided Christians, but active Satanists, participants in a dark, inverted parody of true religion. To be associated with a dog in this context was to be branded as a servant of Lucifer. And so, the dog walked a fine line in the medieval mind, a creature forever caught between heaven and hell. It was a symbol of unwavering loyalty, a mirror of knightly virtue, a candidate for sainthood. And at the same time, it was a vessel of sin, a filthy scavenger, a familiar of the devil, and a byword for the heretic. This profound duality reveals a world that saw in the animal kingdom a reflection of its own deepest hopes and fears. A world where a simple, thoughtful, the soul of the dog, symbolism and belief, a dog's health, a world of care and cruelty. This deep cultural conflict, this symbolic tug-of-war between the holy and the profane, also had a profound impact on the physical world. It shaped how dogs were cared for or not cared for when they fell ill. The world of medieval veterinary medicine was a strange and fascinating place, a blend of surprisingly practical knowledge, ancient humoral theory, and raw, often brutal superstition. Just as a dog's life was determined by its owner's status, so too was its chance of surviving sickness or injury. For the prized hounds of the nobility, no expense was spared. But for the common cur, a very different fate awaited, one that could see it transformed from a living creature into a mere ingredient in a gruesome medical remedy. At the heart of all medieval medicine, for both human and animal, was the concept of the one medicine model. The prevailing theory, inherited from the ancient Greeks, was that of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponded to an element: air, water, fire, and earth, and a quality: hot, cold, wet, and dry. A healthy body, whether human or canine, was one in which these four humors were in perfect balance. Sickness was simply an imbalance, a surplus of one humor over the others. Therefore, the goal of any treatment was to restore that delicate equilibrium. This meant that the medical thinking applied to a sick lord was, in principle, the same as that applied to his sick hound. Let us imagine, then, the best-case scenario. You are a prized greyhound in the household of a great lord, a dog whose speed and skill are a source of immense pride for your master. One morning, you are listless. You refuse your food, and your nose is warm and dry. The master of the hounds is summoned. He does not see a sick dog. He sees a valuable asset in peril. The diagnostic process begins. He observes your behavior, noting your lack of appetite. He examines your waist for any signs of imbalance. Once the ailment is diagnosed, the full resources of the noble household are brought to bear. If you are simply unwell, your diet is immediately changed. The standard fare of bran bread is replaced with a menu designed to tempt and to heal. You might be offered warm goat's milk, a gentle and nourishing substance. Perhaps a rich bean broth or finely chopped meat, easy for a weak stomach to digest. Or, for a truly prized animal, eggs cooked with butter, a luxurious and calorie-dense meal to restore your strength. If the problem is more specific, so too is the treatment. If you are afflicted with worms, a common and debilitating ailment, an enema might be administered, a procedure familiar in human medicine designed to physically purge the parasites from your body. For pain, you might be given mint, a well-known analgesic. For a wound sustained in the hunt, the care would be meticulous. The wound would be cleaned, perhaps stitched, and then dressed with a poultice of herbs. Ground-up bones of specific animals might be applied, in the belief that the properties of the animal could be transferred to aid in healing. In the Islamic world, Where hunting with salukis was a refined art, veterinary manuals offered even more detailed advice, revealing a deep and gentle understanding of canine well-being. These texts emphasized that a dog's psychological health was inseparable from its physical health. They recommended that dogs sleep close to their handlers, not in the same bed, but on their own soft pallet nearby. This proximity, they argued, made the dog friendlier, more obedient, and even made its scent more pleasant. The manual stressed the importance of daily physical contact, stroking with the hands, combing the fur with fine materials like silk, and gentle scratching were not just acts of affection. They were prescribed as essential daily actions to ensure the dog's good health and calm temperament. Feeding was a science. In the colder fall and winter months, the manuals advised feeding the dog only once a day at sunset to keep it fit and eager for the next day's hunt. But in the much hotter spring and summer, the dog was to be fed small portions several times a day, the food served tepid or cold to prevent vomiting. The diet itself was carefully considered. Meat soaked in a beef soup, bread. This was the ideal, a world of attentive, thoughtful care. But this was a world accessible to only a tiny fraction of medieval dogs. For the common cur, the reality was starkly different. A peasant's dog that fell ill was a liability. There were no servants to prepare special meals, no master of the hounds to diagnose its ailment. If the dog was a particularly valuable worker, a skilled sheepdog, for instance, its owner might try a folk remedy, a poultice of common herbs, or a prayer to a local saint. But for most, sickness was a death sentence. The dog would be left to the mercy of its own constitution. If it recovered, it was a sign of its toughness. If it died, it was simply the harsh reality of life. The greatest fear was not a simple sickness, but the terrifying scourge of rabies. In a world without understanding of viruses, rabies was a terrifying mystery, a madness that could seize a familiar animal and turn it into a slavering monster. The bite of a mad dog was almost certainly fatal, a slow and agonizing descent into convulsions and death. The remedies prescribed for such a bite were a testament to the desperation of the afflicted. They ranged from the seemingly rational to the deeply superstitious. Some texts recommended immediately cauterizing the wound with a hot iron, a brutal but potentially effective way to kill the poison at the source. Others prescribed a diet of goose liver or repeated bathing in the sea. These were shots in the dark, desperate attempts to combat a force that no one understood. This pragmatic, often unsentimental view of the common dog led to the darkest chapter in medieval veterinary practice, the use of dogs as medical ingredients. In the one medicine model, if a human could be cured by a substance, it stood to reason that the properties of that substance could be found in other living things. And for a certain kind of medical practitioner, the body of a dog, particularly a young puppy, was seen as a vessel of potent, life-giving warmth and vitality. This led to a number of truly horrific remedies prescribed for human ailments. Imagine a person suffering from what was then called mania, a state of madness and agitation. One extreme folk remedy involved pressing the still warm body of a freshly killed puppy to the patient's shaved scalp, hoping its heat would calm the mind. For the dreaded disease of tuberculosis, then known as consumption, another authority suggested an even more gruesome cure. Another prescription advised boiling newborn pups and having the sufferer bathe in the broth. believing the animal's vitality might transfer to the sick. The patient would then bathe in this water, the hope being that the concentrated essence of the puppy's nascent life, their humoral heat, would be absorbed through the skin, combating the wasting sickness that was consuming the patient from within. These practices are shocking to us, but they reveal the brutal pragmatism of the age. In these moments, the dog ceased to be a living creature. It was not a companion, not a worker, not even a symbol. It was a resource. Its life, particularly the life of a low-status common dog, was seen as expendable, a small price to pay for the chance of saving a human life. It is the ultimate expression of a world where sentimentality was a luxury few could afford, and where the line between a living being and a medical substance could, in the face of death and disease, become terrifyingly thin. This pragmatic approach also extended to the proactive rather than reactive aspects of canine health, breeding and training. While the common cur was left to the whims of chance, the breeding of aristocratic hounds was a serious and deliberate science. The goal was not to create a dog that looked a certain way, but one that could perform a specific function with supreme skill. A lord would select for speed in his greyhounds, for stamina in his running hounds, and for raw power in his mastiffs. The texts prescribed various ways of selecting the best puppies from a litter, from their weight to observing which one the mother seems to favor. Color was explicitly noted as being unimportant. Function was everything. Training, too, was a meticulous process, especially as detailed in the Islamic manuals. It was a lifelong curriculum designed to shape the dog's natural instincts into a set of reliable skills. The education began at just 2 months old, when puppies would be tempted to follow and find smelly treats like a piece of sheepskin or a foxtail, honing their nascent tracking abilities. At 5 months, their courage was tested. They would be set against fearsome predators like mice, a seemingly comical exercise, but one designed to build their confidence and hunting drive in a controlled environment.